Welcome back, and today we're getting back into another SCP video. Today it's going to be SCP-507, Reluctant Dimension Hopper. Okay, judging from the name of the video, I'm assuming it's somebody who jumps through dimensions, but maybe doesn't want to, or is forced to, or has no control over it. So, let's check this one out.
SCP-507, Reluctant Dimension Hopper. Most of the SCPs on the list are things alien to our existence, in one way or another. We're not sure how or why they exist, and there's little for us to relate to when discussing them. There are SCPs, however, that are in most ways normal humans, and they need to eat, sleep, and go to the bathroom like the rest of us, but something makes them quite unique. Most of these anomalous humans end up being somewhat depressing in some fashion, due to being confined for the rest of their lives by the Foundation, or their anomalous property affects them in a very negative way.
That would do it.
It's this aspect that we'll focus on today while discussing SCP-507. As I mentioned, 507 is a normal human in practically every way. Caucasian, blonde hair with green eyes, and somewhat overweight. He needs to eat, drink, and sleep, and possesses no special physical or biological traits.
Alright.
This is often unfortunate for him, however, as his anomalous property forces him to occasionally shift into another dimension or reality.
I mean, that could be really bad, depending on the reality he goes to. We've seen a couple different versions of reality or dimensions that are not that pleasant. So let's see if he goes anywhere interesting.
These shifts are spontaneous, even occurring while sleeping or using the bathroom.
Oh!
And 507 has no control over when he shifts into another dimension or when he shifts back.
Oh, that sucks.
These alternate dimensions vary wildly, with some being only slightly different from our baseline reality, and others drastically different, featuring dangerous entities or conditions. 507's containment procedures mainly involve him being constantly monitored, and although he is allowed much more freedom than most SCPs, he is still normally confined to a Foundation facility. He has a tracking device implanted in him so that the Foundation can easily retrieve him after a shift, as he rarely pops back up where he left. After retrieval, he'll generally give a report on the dimension he visited, as well as potentially...
So that begs the question, if he has no control over where or when he jumps to these other realities, does he have like a home reality? Like, does he always come back to his original dimension is what I'm trying to get at. Like, is there an anchor point that he keeps getting pulled back to between his jumps to other dimensions? Or is it completely random and he may shift from one dimension to another and may never go back to his original dimension?
Make any requests, such as a flashlight he can carry, or a gun that shoots rubber bullets. It is possible for someone else to travel with 507 if they are touching him when he shifts.
Ooh.
But after the Foundation inadvertently discovered this, losing an agent in the process, they established a new protocol that no one is allowed to touch 507 after 2 weeks from him returning from a shift.
Okay, so there must be some kind of... they must have measured some kind of delay between his shifts if they've decided that once he's back, you can interact with him, but there's a 2-week period in which you can interact with him. And after that 2 weeks, there's a high probability that he's going to shift into another dimension. And from that 2-week point on, no one is allowed to interact with him until he shifts again, just to prevent someone accidentally being shifted into another universe. And then, of course, he probably ended up shifting back to his home universe and leaving whatever SCP personnel shifted with him in that dimension. So, unfortunate for that guy, but these are the risks we take working at the Foundation.
They learned that there's always a period of at least 2 weeks between shifts,
Okay, so
which gives 507 at least some time to rest safely. The main bulk of 507's article, then, is comprised of a log recording all of his shifts since arriving in the Foundation's custody. There's simply too many here for me to go over all of them in detail, and likely more will continue to be added as time goes on, so I'd encourage you to read through them yourself if you're interested. In one dimension, 507 was left in complete darkness, and began to fumble around looking for a light or a way out, but after hearing something like soft breathing nearby, decided to just stop and wait it out. 507 later shifted back to what seemed like the same location, but now had a flashlight that he carried with him. He turned on the flashlight and saw a man in a business suit with an impossibly wide smile leaning only inches from his face. The smiling man asked, "Back so soon?" causing 507 to switch off the flashlight, discharge all of his rubber bullets from his gun, and crawl into a corner. Another time, in apparently the same dimension, 507 heard muted breathing again, and began wandering around in the darkness until he saw a light source at the end of a corridor. As he grew closer, the light grew in intensity, and 507 began experiencing a searing pain, causing him to pass out. When he was retrieved, the top layer of his epidermis had been found to be burned away, and he was wearing a pair of large sunglasses, although 507 didn't know where they came from. 507 traveled to this dimension yet again.
Does he not have memories of what he does while he hops? I mean, how does he not know how his skin got burned and where he got glasses from?
Turned on his flashlight and found the smiling man in front of him, with a mysterious brown liquid leaking from behind his sunglasses. The smiling man asked, "Why did you do this?" before wiping some of the brown liquid and rubbing it on 507's cheek, causing him to push the smiling man away. Now he noticed that the smiling man's suit contained several holes, with brown liquid trailing down from them. 507 attempted to shoot his pistol at the entity, but it failed to fire.
So this also means that he can repeatedly go to the same dimension. It's not just different every single time. He has made repeat trips to the same place on more than one occasion, it sounds like,
causing him to flee and hide for the rest of the shift. In another instance, 507 traveled to a forest and grew hungry, so he ate some of the local plant life. The plants then unleashed some form of a telepathic scream in response, causing him to abstain from eating anything. The following day, however, he grew hungry enough to deal with the screams and ate some of the plants. Sometime later, 507 traveled back to this dimension, but this time the plants apparently remembered him and screamed non-stop for 4 days.
Oh man.
Later, he returned to this dimension again, but this time the plants remained silent, and so 507 climbed to the top of a nearby hill to get a lay of the land. He saw that the forest was thick with trees in all directions, and surrounding the forest was a massive blue dome. There have been a number of times that 507 has shifted into a dimension and encountered an analog to the SCP Foundation. In one dimension, the Foundation was known as the Society for Containment of the Paranormal.
Society for the Containment of the Paranormal. Okay, so still SCP. And it makes sense that he would run into a foundation similar to the SCP or fulfilling the same role or function as the SCP Foundation if he's in universes that, you know, aren't too different from our own, or his own, I should say. But that still means he could wind up in places where SCP Foundation is non-existent, or maybe a universe where one of the different groups of interest has taken a primary hold over the world or the country or wherever he is that he's at. There's literally an unlimited amount of possibilities that you could write for this particular SCP. Literally any dimension that has ever been mentioned in any SCP he could visit. it could be fatal to him if not properly equipped, but you could write a million stories for this guy. It's pretty wild.
Possessing a strong British influence, and was opposed by the Covert Occult Group and the Church of the Mending God. 507 was detained as an intruder and repeatedly questioned until he shifted back. Another time, 507 was gone from our dimension for 3 months, during which he encountered another Foundation equivalent, but this time managed to become a member of their personnel.
So it seems like there's at least a 2-week period between shifts that is safe for him to kind of like relax and let his guard down. But it doesn't seem like there's any real pattern, at least as of yet, to how long he's gone for, because when they're talking about some of these, some of them seem like he's maybe gone for a couple hours. Some of them seem like he might be gone for a couple days. This last one they just mentioned said he was gone for 3 months. There's actually kind of a lot going on here with just the amount of permutations of realities that he could possibly visit and how long he's there. There's just my mind is going crazy right now just thinking of all the different realities that we've talked about up to this point and realizing he could have visited any one of those or all of them.
507 managed to learn about several SCPs that our Foundation did not know about, allowing them to later retrieve them.
Oh, wow.
And was working in the field to retrieve another one when he finally shifted back. Curiously, our Foundation had sent an MTF to retrieve the same SCP during that time, suggesting an unusual potential connection between the two dimensions. In another dimension, 507 found that their Foundation equivalent had inverted all of the offices and containment chambers, so that the Foundation personnel were being contained due to their ability to create dangerous experiments, and the containment staff consisted of anomalous humanoids.
What?
Although more docile than our reality's versions. Due to this, the facility was filled with memetic hazards and other dangers, and it is unknown how a more drastic scenario had not already occurred there. Other times,
Wild.
507 has actually encountered other versions of himself. In one reality, 507 found himself in the midst of a snowstorm, drastically unprepared. Before he succumbed to exposure, however, he was rescued by another man and pulled into a cave. 507 was led to an underground hot spring to recover, and was soon joined by the man, who turned out to be another version of himself.
Oh, that's so cool. That's wild. Man, there's so much stuff you could do with this. Not only does he get to visit any reality in the SCP universe, but there's a potential that he can not only take other people with him, but he could cross paths with alternate versions of himself. Man, this would almost make a great television show, kind of in the same vein as Quantum Leap, where every episode he leaps into a new person's body and has to deal with their stuff. But in this case, he would leap to a new dimension and obviously have to deal with whatever he finds there, whether it be hostile SCPs, harsh environments, groups of interests, or the SCP Foundation itself, or just wandering around and trying to maybe fit in with a regular type society until his next jump. There's so many stories you could make out of this, where this guy can go anywhere and possibly meet anyone. It's almost like a time-traveling Doctor Who scenario where every episode could be its own contained story of where does the Dimension Hopper go this week? Who does he meet? How does he interact with them? Maybe there's some episodes where he doesn't meet anybody and just has to survive the environment. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff you could do with this.
The conversation between the two is unlogged, but 507 noticed that this version of him had scarring across his torso and at the bases of his limbs. In a more notable example, the Foundation found 2 507s in his containment chamber who had been talking for some time. Both of them admitted to encountering the Smiling Man, showing a potential connection between the entity and all versions of 507.
More interesting stuff here. Don't know who this Smiling Man is, but more than one dimension hopper has come into contact with this guy. And I wonder if his dimension hopping has any kind of pattern to it, not just a pattern in how long between jumps and how long the jumps last while he's there, but also location. Is there any particular location pattern that goes on with this guy too? Because in the example of the snowstorm that they gave, I mean, what would be the odds of on the entire planet he manages to run into himself, especially having it be close enough to a cave and a hot spring? Because that implies that the other dimension hopper was there first, kind of explored, checked it out, found the cave, found the hot spring, and then managed to find another version of himself and save himself. They must have entered that universe in relatively similar locations, at least really close enough to find each other within walking distance. So that almost leads me to believe that, in conjunction with the fact that they have both met this Smiling Man, that maybe there's certain points in each universe that almost act like spawn points for this guy, where he may go to this universe, but there may be certain locations there where he always is going to appear at. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. It seems like a really simple, straightforward SCP on its face, but there's so much that can be done with this.
Both of them had also decided not to admit which one belonged to this dimension and which one was the visitor. While talking, one of the 507s disappears, and the doctor asks the remaining one what the difference between their realities was. The remaining 507 says that in the other's reality, Lincoln was killed by his vice president, instead of by General Lee. The doctor informs him that in this reality, Booth assassinated Lincoln. We're informed that testing revealed that 507's ability has no biological basing, as severed pieces still shift along with the main body, suggesting the Foundation maimed that version of...
I was going to say, how did they find that out without having removed one of his limbs first? Like, oh, okay.
507 in some way before he shifted back. Our version of 507 returned a few days later, and was not informed of the incident. Like I said, 507 is not a particularly cheerful tale, as he lives his entire life either trapped in a Foundation facility or teleporting off to an alien world.
Yeah, not that great, especially from his perspective, but from the Foundation's perspective, I would think that they would want to treat 507 really, really well. That they would want to take care of him, that they would want to build trust with him, because if there's any individual who is able to shift dimensions like this, he would also be an invaluable source of potential information. Not only learning about SCPs that they didn't even know existed because he found out about them from a different universe, he may wind up having the answer for how to get rid of the hard-to-destroy reptile, or where the missing pieces of methane are, or something like that. He may end up finding valuable information that was discovered in another universe. So this guy could potentially be one of the greatest intelligence resources the Foundation could possibly have, as well as a potential threat. So you would think that the Foundation would want to keep this guy really happy and really work to gain his trust and have him trust them so that they could have a mutual relationship. Because obviously the Foundation could have plenty to offer him. You know, first and foremost, a group of people who actually know, understand, and believe what he's going through. They could provide, obviously, housing, food, shelter, any kind of equipment that he may need to take with him on jumps. So the two working together would be a very beneficial relationship for both of them.
Some of these are nightmarish and horrific, filled with spiders, hostile aliens, or hazardous environments, while others are surprisingly pleasant. One dimension was so perfect that 507 attempted to commit suicide after returning because nothing could compare.
Oh, wow.
While 507 is ripe for creative writing due to the infinite number of alternate dimensions he could travel to, it's also interesting due to some of the questions that go unanswered.
Right?
Such as why he hasn't shifted into a dimension where he's encased in rock, or on a planet with no breathable air.
Good points. I was kind of wondering that myself. Like, I'm a little surprised how he's managed to survive this long, because if this is truly uncontrollable and there's an infinite number of dimensions that span across a giant spectrum of how things are and how they exist, then it's only a matter of time before he winds up somewhere where he simply cannot survive. So, there's a lot of questions that are unanswered about this.
Despite the limitless amount of potential dangers, 507 always manages to make it back home, and most of the time in relatively good spirits. Although I would never want a life like 507's, I certainly enjoy reading about it.
Subject arrived at the mouth of the cave, surrounded by almost unbearable heat. Subject walked outside the cave for further investigation to find that the area around it was a baked wasteland. Most of the heat appeared to emanate from two suns in the sky. The object could not decide whether they were extremely large or extremely close to the planet. Upon further examination, the suns blinked and turned away, taking the heat with them. Subject spent the rest of his shift as far back in the cave as possible. Ooh, that's kind of creepy. That almost implies that he shifted somewhere. He was either on a giant creature or around a giant creature, and that the suns were actually giant, like, eyes bearing down on him. Anyways, guys, that was SCP-507, the Reluctant Dimension Hopper. Really, really enjoyed this one. The amount of possibilities for this thing are near limitless. There's just so many things you could do with this. So many tales that could be told. And these are tales that don't even have to include SCPs, but you can always spice them up by having SCPs in them. Maybe he goes to a world where the Bigfoots are still in charge of everything and they have a wildly advanced technological civilization. And he could come back and tell us about their technology and we could reverse engineer it. And that also implies if he can grab a person and take them with them to another dimension, he could conceivably grab technology from a different universe and bring it back to us, and we could reverse engineer it and have a whole technological revolution. There's so many things that are possible with this guy. So I really like this one. It's really interesting to me because I always like things that get my mind going and get me thinking about the possibilities of what could be, the unanswered questions that this raises in my head. So I love these things. I hope you loved the video. If you did, please like, please subscribe. Really helps the channel out. As always, leave a comment down below. Let me know what other SCPs there are. Let me know if there's a video strictly about the Dimension Hopper and the dimensions that he's visited, because that'd be kind of cool to hear about. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching the video. Take care of yourselves and have a great day.